Now, how many people here took a wheelchair to get up these, into the space? Has anyone ever tried that? No, probably. I walked up, I think, 3 stairs or 4 stairs to get into here. I don't know that there is any way to actually physically get into this space if you have a wheelchair. There is? Perfect. And not that's to go off of just either Mozilla or the organization that's here, but it's something that we often don't think about. Once you're in a wheelchair and you're in this space, it's quite easy to go off and to use the washrooms, and I'm sure it complies quite nicely. But there's things like that take place in both the virtual space as well as in the physical space, and we need to remind ourselves of on a regular basis. I thought about sort of building a presentation. I've been doing a lot of presentations on accessibility with open source lately, and I find it a really neat opportunity. But the people here are really interested in trying to go off and engage with citizens and connect with citizens, right? And that seems to be a real passion for a lot of people here. That the ability to go out and connect citizens to their government. Be able to engage people to try and allow people to have to empower people to have agency to make change and to engage with the things in their lives that they'd like to be able to change. Well, 14% of the population is going to have trouble doing that online with this technology, and 14% is pretty big. The IT industry has worried about, or the web industry is worried about the IE6 and IE7 usage. Well, when it was even just 5 or less than that, 5% of the market, but to have 14% of people who are potentially interested in your issue not be able to access it because of those barriers, those technological barriers to your information, I mean, that's a pretty serious issue. So whether you're talking about data and you're trying to do data visualization, well, how do you take that data and convey it into a way that somebody who's blind can go off and access it? It's a really interesting challenge, and there's people who've been looking at this. It's not something that's easy. Mapping, again, is really interesting for people to go off and to think about mapping and to get an understanding quickly of an issue. But how do you convey a map to people who have, again, who are blind or have low vision? There's so many times that people look at accessibility issues and they sort of take a few extreme issues, or extreme disabilities, like blindness. There's people who navigate the web through a sip and puff interface. So they're using eye trackers to navigate the web. There's so much diversity in the human condition, and so often we don't think about how people are interacting with this technology and using this technology in order to perceive, operate, and understand what we're trying to go out and to build for them. So we need to be able to provide. If we're going to go off and reach out to our citizens and engage with them, and 14% is a significant number of those citizens, we need to be able to find better ways to go off and to engage with them and try and reduce those barriers and become aware of them. So there's a couple of amazing websites about how to go off and to think about various people who we don't think about as having disabilities. Like there's some people, when you take medication, their eyesight gets blurry and they suddenly go and have lower vision. There's the baby boomer population. Well, the entire generation of baby boomers is losing their mobility slowly. They are becoming disabled day by day by day. And they don't think about it. That's not something that they want to be referred to as a part of. Sorry, but it's a reality for all of us, right? We're all temporarily able-bodied, and if we design our interfaces so that they're geared for young 20-year-old folks, then you're going to be missing out on a significant portion of the population. And for people who are in the business world, I keep reminding them that the baby boomers have never really, they're not used to living with disappointment. They're used to getting their way. So I think that there's going to be additional pressure from the baby boomer population to go up and to enact changes. And there's the AODA is one of those laws. And how many people here know about the AODA? Okay, that's great. Certainly a lot of people with the province. Does everyone who worked with the province have a website that they feel complies with the standard? Okay.
Careful. The government people are not doing the hands up.
So, Semi from the Department of Labor. Okay. It is a tricky issue, and that there aren't enough people who really understand how to go off and evaluate it. The AODA is the requirements are looking at the international standards for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and these were set up in 2010, and they're an interesting framework that's very forward-looking that allows a system to look at how people again understand information, how they interact with it, and how they're able to operate it. And that's it's useful, but it's also like so much of the rest of the internet, it is changing. So I think this is the first time that I know of that there's legislation in place that is following a guideline that is evolving and evolving fairly quickly in terms of government legislation. So it's worth looking at and looking at how to go off and how your website and how your tools, if you're trying to go off and learn how to go off and interact with people with disabilities. There's lots of resources under the World Wide Web Consortium that allow you to go off and to interact with this. We're interested in open source, and it's great that this is being hosted in Mozilla. You think, what on earth does Mozilla have to do with accessibility? Well, when you were talking about Mozilla and issues and questions, I was like, man, I tell you, if I could pull out an issue number right now for Mozilla bugs that I'd like to have addressed, then just, not that, and there are some that I would like to have addressed. But this is not the right time, you're not the right person.
Accessibility team,
most of the assistive technology tools interact with the browser, whether it's Firefox, Chrome, or Internet Explorer, and the browser is a really critical component for interacting with websites and information. And again, the browser is changing, and the efforts from groups like Mozilla to sort of create the open web is really useful, and to work for standards-based development and to be evolving and keeping up with those standards. And I think that people don't realize how complicated and difficult it is to make a website be accessible and make sure that it stays accessible. If you had even a fairly small website and you made sure that it was 100% WK 2.0 AA compliant as of right now, well, in 6 months' time, it may not be, even if you hadn't changed anything on your website, because the technology is changing, the user expectations are changing, the environment of the internet is an ecosystem, and you can't expect it to sit still, and you need to be able to engage with it. So I really think that the only way we're going to go off and find solutions for accessibility with information technology is to engage with open source technologies and to contribute back. How many people know about sort of the free isn't speech or free isn't beer debate within open source software? I prefer the other one, the less known one, which is free isn't kittens. So free isn't kittens is the idea that if you get a kitten, that's great, but if you don't feed it, if you don't nurture it, if you don't change its litter box, very soon it becomes a real pain. And we need to be able to find the software that we're going to use. And there's a lot of open source software that's critical for in manipulating and organizing data. And we need to find ways to feed it so that those communities, those software communities, are able to grow and thrive. And that may mean donating to the Mozilla Foundation. It may mean going off and reporting bugs with the whatever data collection tool you're using. It may be writing code and contributing code back to see that there's a change and evolution that's happening. It may be going off and integrating an accessibility checker tool like Tenon that integrates nicely with open source tools into your application to make sure that there is some initial testing done for accessibility in your application. But you need to be able to contribute back and to push that software ahead. I feel like I'm in an incredibly privileged position because my company is a fairly small company. We have about 10 staff, and I've been able to move 3% of the internet to be more accessible by working with the Drupal community and engaging with it and being a persistent, tenacious advocate for accessibility in that space. And moving 3% of the internet is a really huge accomplishment. But that's just one platform. And it's being able to influence other platforms. But there are so many other open source tools out there. And we need to be able to see that those tools are available for people with disabilities to use, so that people who are blind can go off and can crunch the data as well as everyone else. We need them to be. We need the tools we use to integrate with open data to be open source, because we need to be able to validate them. We need people to be able to refactor them and to riff on the ideas and the concepts that are available, so that we can verify them to see that this is are the results that you're getting through this nice graph actually accurate or not? Maybe they reflect a bias that's built into the programmer's thoughts, or maybe there's an error that's just being expanded on over time. Whatever it is, if it's not open source, we can't really necessarily know that the information is giving us the values that we're looking for. There isn't that transparency that's necessary to go off and to provide the level of knowledge and confidence that we would need for these critical civic issues. So that's basically where.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it sounds like you're about wrapping up. We've got maybe 5 minutes. I'm sure people have a ton of questions.
Perfect.
So I'm wondering if it would be comfortable for you to kind of wrap up the presentation and just open it up a bit, because I'm sure people have a ton of questions about this.
Are there any questions?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, so what's the biggest, like, the legislation's in place.
Yeah.
What's the biggest barrier you're coming across in terms of implementation? Money, is just people don't know about it?
I think that accessibility is very much like security. People expect it to be there, and they expect it to be free. And they're not willing to pay or invest in that the research required to make that a reality. And that's what the root of the problem. There's so many basic issues that need to be addressed. There's the low-hanging fruit, and so many of the issues are sort of structural. Like there are contracts in place for accessibility that are in place for a lot of agencies who are trying to go off and set up a new website or a new piece of ICT. But the people who are in positions of evaluating those contracts don't understand accessibility enough to verify whether or not they're being fulfilled or not. And they're often, the process for evaluating accessibility usually happens at the very end of the project. So you get to the very end of the project, you're a week before launch, and then suddenly you do this accessibility review. You realize that it's really not up to snuff, but you're out of time, you're out of budget, and you're stuck. And really, the process for evaluating accessibility has to go back and get pushed back even before the project begins, to start looking at, like, what is your style guide? What are the colors you're using? How do you go off and what are the elements you're going to use that might have problems with screen readers or with Dragon Naturally Speaking or other interfaces? It needs to be thought of earlier in the process, and by having organizations contribute to open source software and make it more accessible and more robust early on in the process, like even before they start the implementation, it'll be a lot easier. But again, everyone waits to the end, and they're surprised that it isn't secure and accessible and reliable. Yeah?
I'm going to follow up on this exchange. And we had a presentation here a couple of weeks ago on user research. And there's a lot of processes and protocols in place that are really, really good, but they're not standard practice.
Right.
The government doesn't understand, private sector doesn't quite get them. In your experience, are you finding that there's increasingly a move in that direction to just, hey, we're going to do some accessibility stuff, or throw things in, but do the actual proper user research to identify at the front end what the needs are going to look like?
No. Basically, there's certainly places where user research is exciting and where there's a lot of drive for this, and there's a big enough pot of money to make this a reality. The UK, the Government Design Services, they seem to understand user research and are investing heavily in that. I'm pretty confident that because of their structure, that they're also looking at accessibility issues and trying to go off and address for more than just able-bodied users. But it's not really standardized. There certainly are efforts to try and take usability best practices and to like building focus groups and that type of work and use that with different communities of people with disabilities. But there's so many different kinds of people with disabilities that it's hard to go off into, it's hard to get the budget and the requirements in order to make that happen in a natural way. One of the best examples of a place where they've done this effectively, though, there's a Canadian government, I think which department it was, they got people with disabilities to go off and write breakup letters about what trouble they had with the existing websites and why they didn't like it and why it wasn't useful for them. And then they got the various people with disabilities who were writing these breakup letters to look at and review the notes of other people with different disabilities, to go off and to understand and empathize and learn from each other, and then sort of build a consensus of ideas around where the problems are and how to go off and address those for a broader community rather than just particular people with issues.
Where